much for joining us here today. This is Paul Talman with 9.Connects. You are in the right place if you are here for our webinar on the Vault, AVS, NEXUS, Concord Pro. What is this whole thing all about? And that's what we're going to try to do here in the next hour. So let's get on with it here. My objectives, there are three things. Number one, what is this thing? How is it structured? And really, what does it do? And I'm, again, hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a fairly good idea of what it's capable of doing. Just a quick housekeeping note, I would like to answer some questions at the end. If you do have any questions, feel free to write those into the GoToWebinar panel under questions, and I'll be more than happy to try to give you an answer to them. Some of them I may not be able to answer, and if I can't, then at that point we'll do a little bit of research on our end. I'm fairly certain you probably have some questions that may be a bit tricky or difficult for me to answer in the time frame that we have available. Also a disclaimer as well, we are not, meaning we being 9.Connects, are not affiliated with Altium Designer at this point in time. We used to have a partnership with them in the past, but this presentation was in no way influenced by Altium. It is completely an independent assessment. If you do like what you see here today, feel free to contact Altium. Their pricing is listed under Concord Pro, but we have nothing to do with the actual sale of Concord Pro or NEXUS. So I'd like to start this off with a polling question. How many of you, or why are you attending this webinar? And we've set this up so you can give multiple answers. So if you can take a moment to do that, I would appreciate it. Wow, okay, so hopefully you can see the results over here, 41%, a bit confused about the Vault offering. That doesn't surprise us. I'd still have some points of confusion about it too. So I can understand that. About a third of you own the product and want a better understanding of it. And about 25% of you are considering this product and want a better understanding. And then there's yet another, I'd say about a third of you just simply curious. So we have a really good peanut butter spread over here of different interests. So hopefully I'll be able to touch upon everything here that you guys are looking to understand or need. So with that, let's jump on over here. There we go. I don't want to get too deep into the whole naming conventions that's been going on for the last 19 years, but it's a little bit important for us to kind of understand what's been going on for the last 2 years and understand where we are with this idea of Concord Pro. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be referring to it primarily as Concord Pro as we move forward, because that's really the offering that Altium would like a lot of people to either migrate to if you already have it, or to purchase if you're interested in it. So in the past, it had some name of Vault associated with it, and the term Vault basically went away with NEXUS 1.0, which was introduced in Altium Designer 18. And at that point in time, there was a requirement that basically said, hey, if you're going to do this thing called NEXUS and becomes the Vault, you're also going to have what's called a NEXUS client that's going to interface with the Vault, and that's what they now call the server as well. So when I'm talking about this, we have to be careful because there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around here. But what we mean is that NEXUS or Concord Pro or the Vault has two elements to it. They basically have some type of server, and then they have some type of client. And in the past, the client was usually Altium Designer. In fact, it was always Altium Designer. In Altium Designer 18, they said, nah, no worries about, let's not do the Altium Designer thing. Let's make it a separate thing called the NEXUS client. And that's the way they went with it. And it continued on with Altium Designer 19, or partly when they released Altium Designer 19, they created something called NEXUS 2.0, which again, you had to download the NEXUS client in order to interface with the NEXUS server. Okay, and you may have asked yourself, what's the difference between the NEXUS client and Altium Designer? A whole lot of nothing, quite frankly, other than the fact that the NEXUS client had a few features that were specific to interacting with the NEXUS server. And as a matter of fact, when you see my screen today, I am actually using the NEXUS client, even though I'm connecting into Concord Pro, and that's just because our license happened to be a NEXUS server license. And so you'll still see it, but the point I want to make here is it looks and feels like Altium Designer. So it's not like you were missing out on anything in terms of functionality. It was just, how do you interface between this thing called the Vault, now called NEXUS, that's sitting on your server, and the client, which is you sitting there either using Altium Designer or the NEXUS client. And of course, for NEXUS 1.0 and 2.0, you had to use the NEXUS client. In March of 2019, there are two offerings. So what Altium realized was that this out-of-the-box solution worked for a lot of smaller companies, but for larger companies, it was going to require some type of custom coding. And this is not unusual. If you're familiar with things like SAP or PLM systems, companies usually spend literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to set these things up. And so they kind of quickly realized that this could not be an out-of-the-box solution. There are workflows, there are things like Oracle and other major databases that they want NEXUS to, or Altium Designer to interface with, and therefore that's going to require custom coding. So they said, okay, let's split this thing off. So what we used to understand as being NEXUS the Vault now has become something called NEXUS Enterprise. It is a custom offering. As a matter of fact, they're not going to offer it to you unless you're a Fortune, I'd say maybe Fortune 500 company, and you're a long-term customer of Altium, and they think that you've got the girth and the money necessary to look into this. But this does require custom coding, and it's not an out-of-the-box solution. What they used to call NEXUS is now called Concord Pro. So it is an out-of-the-box solution, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at here today. So what they would like you to do is that if you're a current NEXUS user, you can migrate to Concord Pro unless you are actually interested in their enterprise solution. Or you would basically go to, well, at this point, you go to Concord Pro and continue along that line, and you'd now use Altium Designer to interface with Concord Pro. So if you ever went down to the download page, you'll notice that Concord Pro for the server is available there, but there's no what you'd call Concord Pro client that is going to be associated with it. You're simply going to use Altium Designer moving ahead. And then Altium 365, the only reason I mention this is that this is also somewhat of a Vault solution, but it hasn't come out yet. Maybe if you've seen some of the stuff they've done in their annual meeting that they get together with here, but it's going to have a lot of look and feel like the Vault, plus some other features that will be coming as well. So just keep your eye out on that. That may be a solution for you if you don't have the IT wherewithal to do those things, or if you're willing to let your IP basically outside of the company premises and keep it through one of Altium services on the cloud there. So more to come on this, and we're waiting eagerly to find out more about it as well. But for our purposes today, let's focus on Concord Pro. So the big question is, what is it trying to address? Let's look at the traditional flow of files in Altium Designer. And if you think about it, all of the files in Altium Designer can be boiled down into three categories. It can be a library file, it can be a template file, or it can be a project file. Just think about all the different files you can put under one of those three categories. So when it comes to libraries, let's take a look at this picture over here. We use Altium Designer for the vast majority of our flow from specification to manufacturing. And I know I've glossed this over. There's a lot of little sub-steps in this, but this is the general flow. And when we do this, we deal with libraries. And where are those libraries? Well, those libraries are actually residing externally in our hard drives, right? They could be on our network drive, they could be on our hard drive. So, but they're external to Altium Designer. And so our graphical information is definitely external, but our parametric data is also going to be external as well, and it could be in a database. The same thing is true when it comes to the project files. It's all going to be outside. It's going to be external, either in our hard drive, the network drive. It could be in Subversion, but it's still external. The problem we have with the libraries and the projects is that they can be scattered all over the place. What's even worse are the templates, right? When we take a look at these templates, you can take a look at this picture here. There are what we call predefined templates, ones that we specifically call template files, and there are ones that there's actually template files themselves, and what I call taking a predefined file and turning it into a template, like a PCB doc. There is no such thing as a PCB DOT file, so what do? We take a PCB doc, and then we save it off, and we make it into a template that we want to use over and over again. Now, if you're anything like me, what happens is you'll create a really cool template, and you open it and you forget to do a save as, and next thing you know, you just stomped on your template because you just used it for whatever immediate purpose you're going to use it for. The other problem with templates that I have seen as well is they're all over creation. So unlike libraries, which might find their way into a specific directory, or a project which might find their way into a specific directory, the templates can be all over the place. And when someone gets a hold of it, they do whatever they want with it. And I do remember working at a particular company where I set up all these templates, and within 2 weeks, people had taken those templates and done whatever else they wanted to do with them. So even if you want to have them use those templates, they're subject to being copied and then used all over the place to personal likings. So how do we deal with that? That's what Concord Pro or Nexus or Vault was all about. Take everything you got and put it into a managed container. Your libraries, your templates, your projects, put them all in one location. And by the way, that's half the battle that I found in most companies. And that literally is only half the battle. The other half is making sure you manage it. But the other half is, where is it? If you've worked in those companies, like, okay, everybody's got their own little directory shrubbery going on in the network drive. Well, where do they put it? And in fact, there was a defense company I worked at. It got so bad that if you didn't send me a link, I'd basically send you an email back saying, until you give me a link, I'm not going to look at this because I'm not going to go searching through it. So if you've had that issue with things being all over the place, now you've got a managed container to handle all of that. So let's take a look at this for a moment. So you have components, and in Concord Pro, you basically define things as a component with a link to a footprint into a symbol. And also, if you've got any simulation models, you've got those as well. One of the cool features they've added in here is that you don't now have to embed the step model into the footprint. You can actually have a link to a 3D model in there as well. So that's really a nice feature that they've done here. I'll talk about this little section down here about the component editor in just a moment, because it's a really important feature that we need to understand. Also, all of your templates can be stored in there as well, plus a couple of new ones that you didn't know that that they introduced basically with Concord Pro. And I'll talk about some of the key ones that you have to have or that might be of interest to you. And of course, you have your projects as well. You'll notice that there is a project catalog. So this is the end result of your efforts. So when you're ready to do what's called a release, a formal release, you put it into your Concord Pro. But in the meantime, when you're working on it, you'll use something that's called the Git VCS, which is very similar to Subversion, though Altium has now moved over to Git. And yes, if you do have a Subversion repository, you can redirect it to use that. But the default now is Git when you install this whole thing in. Now, let's talk about this component editor, because this is where it gets really interesting. One of the problems that Altium is trying to address is they don't want you to build stuff external. I mean, when I say build it, you're basically opening up a new file, you're doing something with it, and then pushing it into Concord Pro. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest problems that people had with the Vault was that in the past, you had to do all the work externally. If you were going to make a component, you first did your symbol, and then you push it in the Vault. Then you created a footprint, and then you push it in the Vault. Then you declared a component, and you push that into the Vault. And everybody's complaining, saying that this is crazy. Basically, I've got two libraries, one that's sitting external in order to get in the Vault, and then the one that's the Vault itself. So the way Altium addressed that is he said, fine, we're going to make sure that when you want to create a new component, and by the way, I'll demonstrate this here in a couple of minutes, we're going to basically give you the editors you need to do it, and you don't have to worry about where you're going to save it, because we're going to save it for you somewhere on your hard drive. In fact, we don't even want you to know where we saved it, because we just want you to get that work done and to get it released. And if you don't want to, you just cancel it and we'll remove it from your hard drive. That's how they want to do it here. So the intention is not to have you build stuff externally. The intention is to have you to do all this work inside their editors, and it's all, the administration of the file stuff is all handled by Concord Pro. And that's kind of the same thing that's going on over here with the projects. Now, keep in mind the major difference is that with components and templates, it's usually one person working on them, and it is usually 1 or 2 days of work in order to get these things released, if not sooner. The only reason why you've got this prototyping version control like Git or Subversion available is because projects take weeks or months, and then eventually you need to release them formally into this into the Concord Pro, which I call the production version control at that point in time. And I'll talk a little bit more about this because this is very powerful. But to me, the key thing here, and again, I'll show a slide that talks about this a little bit more, is that when you release something in Concord Pro, you know exactly what you released. And that's a big problem for companies where a lot of people are touching projects. Yes, I've got some on my hard drive, and so-and-so's got theirs on their hard drive, and yeah, there's a shared network drive, and then purchasing got involved, and then CM got involved, and so we don't even know what the true project files are. And so by having this over here, when you release it, you know exactly for that revision, these are the files, you can't change them. Really, really powerful. On top of all this, so did anything change in Altium Designer? And the answer is no. The intention is that the flow that you've always used and know remains the same. It's just a matter of where do I get my files from and where do I put my files as I create them. That's really what it's all about. Now, I do have a polling question for you if you don't mind. Altium obviously moved to Git. I'm starting to learn a little bit more about it. I'd like to know if you guys are doing anything with Git. So let's get a poll out there for you. All righty. So so good portion of you have heard of it or even dabbled into it, and about 1/5 of you are saying what, never heard of it. So just as a quick, my understanding of it really fast here is that Subversion obviously is the one that's been around since the actually I take it back, it's been around since about 2000. Before that it was CVS. Git, my understanding, is supposed to be a new generation, but I don't think it was built off of SVN, but rather some Linux concepts. And I just got to spend a little more time on that. But from what I can see so far, it acts very similar to those offerings that are given by the Subversion repository. But more to come on that, because we definitely will look at it here at 9.connects. Anyways, the reason I bring that up there is just wanted to see, where you are with that. But nevertheless, when you're working in Altium Designer, it works as though you're working in Subversion. So it should not feel any different. Let's talk about some of the advantages of Concord Pro. First and foremost, as I mentioned, it's a centralized location for libraries, templates, and projects. If you're in a large company, that's really a big thing, to just know where projects are so that you may be able to do some reuse on them so that everybody knows what their components are, if they have the same reuse of templates. There's also managed authorization, which to me is really big as well, because again, if people are just taking templates and doing whatever they want with them, then what's the point of really having a company template? So there's 3 levels. The 3 basic levels are user, so the user can just make use of them. The librarian can create templates and components, and the administrator can do the template and component creation plus make changes to the file structure. And the file structure is actually an important thing, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. One of the things you may have noticed, these little cute icons that are next to all of these different things that you can put into Concord Pro. Well, that's because there are what's called content folder types. So for example, if you look over here, if you have layer stacks that you want to make available and you've set them up accordingly, then you can put them into Concord Pro under a very specific folder called layer stacks. And if you want to create a new one, you can simply press the button in that folder and it will allow you to get into that editor, so you don't have to go into, for example, a PCB doc and then open up the layers and go into the layer stack manager and then create one and save one off. You don't have to do that. Within that template area, you'll just click on that button, it'll bring it up, you make your layer stack, you save it. I shouldn't say even save it, you basically commit it to the server at that point, and then you're good to go. So same thing with the schematics and other things as well. And as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more about templates in a bit. But the point I want to bring over here is you get to organize your files based on similar extensions, right? So those like your BOM docs and your out job files and so on and so forth. The other major advantage to me, and I mentioned this earlier, but this is what you get when you release a project into Concord Pro. If you want to make changes to this, you can, but you don't make changes to this revision. You either continue to work in Git, which may already be set up, or if you're working on a different system, you can download the entire project, get it going, and then later on you can release those changes as a different revision. But you know exactly what you've got for this revision here. So you can get either the whole project, your source files like your schematic docs, your PCB docs, your fabrication files for your fabrication, and of course your assembly documents as well. So this, as I mentioned, is a really strong feature of the tool. Nothing, or I shouldn't say really nothing, very little gets saved out of Concord Pro. The intention is to let Concord Pro handle that type of file management, because in the end, what you're trying to do here in the bottom right corner is to release the server. And if you don't like what you got going on, you just cancel the edit. In fact, if you create a new component and you say save, that's it. There's no save as. It's not going to ask you where to save it on your drive. It's just going to save it because, again, it's going to put it in a place that it will manage for you until you're ready to do the release. Of course, there is the Git repository, which would be local to your drive. And again, that's a little bit different than a template or a library because projects do take a longer period of time to complete. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages as well, because there are some key things to understand about this. Number one, it is a closed system. So if you are looking to build something that can work between Concord Pro and an SAP system or an Oracle database system, that's when you need to start looking into NEXUS Enterprise. Now, with that being said, I am going to show you a way that Concord Pro can work with an external database, but it's not working directly with it. We're doing it through a DB link. So I'll demonstrate that here in a little bit. But if you want something where you've got a lot of bidirectional information going between Concord Pro and some large system out there, that you're going to have to talk to Altium about their enterprise solution. It is primarily designed for Altium files. So yes, you can store Word docs and Excel sheets and PDFs and PowerPoints and even files from AutoCAD if you wanted to, or SolidWorks or anything else like that. However, that's all it's going to do is just store those things. And of course, the files are stored internally to the server. So if the server is down, it's going to be a bit difficult to get to those files. The one thing that we have found is that it's not necessarily easy to integrate with outside contractors. So even if you have this all nice and set up internally and people are using this, if you have an outside contractor who's just doing that work, you're going to have to be very careful about how they set their stuff up so that when you migrate their information into Concord Pro, it's going to match up with those things that you've already had set up. So for example, you can see a little snippet we've got here in the bottom right corner of names and the revision ID. Now the revision ID is something that the administrator will have to handle, but the naming convention would have to be something that would be looked upon prior to the library migration to ensure that it's done correctly. Also, the setup really does take time. In order for me to get ready for this particular webinar and to give you guys some samples that had some girth to them, it really took us about 2 weeks to get something set up, and it's not even completely set up to my particular liking. But you have to understand the file structure, because the file structure has an impact on the naming conventions and where things are. The library migration, there are 5 ways to do it. 4 of them are not recommended because the library migration tool does a phenomenal job of pulling stuff in. But if you don't set it up in a certain way, for example, if you just simply take an SCH lib and you pull it in and it's got 400 resistors in it, you're going to have 400 symbols in there of that particular resistor, because in a SCH lib, it can't tell the difference between one graphic to another. So what we recommend to people, for example, is if you're going to do a library migration, you kind of have to set it up in an Excel sheet to treat it as a temporary database file so that you don't get this type of duplication. Template creation and setup, again, just naming conventions and making sure that you've got them set up to the company's needs. And the naming conventions themselves, for the revision IDs, you can always use the default ones that they've got, which basically is comp followed by a serial number. But we have found that if you give it a really good ID, and again, it impacts the way things get brought in and how things get created. But if you have a really good ID, then you can trace it back very quickly as to where it came from. And that's true for us in particular because we're experimenting with different libraries. So if we have something that's just called comp and then a number after it, and we've got several libraries, it's going to be really difficult for us to trace it back to which library it actually came from. So
for lost power, hit the record button.
Okay, gotcha. We're good. So all right, let's talk about disadvantages over here. So the disadvantages continue to be very exacting, and I'd say the best word is sometimes painstaking. You really got to know what you're doing here, and it's not that easy to modify and delete things as you go along. So if you have a bunch of things and you realize, oh shoot, I need to change these, there are some batching features for the components, but they're not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because you got to go through the motions of making those changes and then pushing them up as a new revision. And this definitely does require a librarian or an administrator. If you don't have that, then let's put it this way. You know how difficult it is to put the library together by itself through a file-based system. Do not expect Concord Pro to take your stuff and somehow organize it and make it better. In fact, it becomes more difficult to fix those things once they're in Concord Pro. So in fact, what we've kind of recommended to some people is that if you've already got something going on in Concord Pro and it's a truly big mess, sometimes the best thing to do is just data dump it, fix it outside, get it cleaned up, and bring it back in. And that's kind of the unfortunate part about it. But that's true, by the way, for any type of revision control system. You can't just go in there and willy-nilly move things about. Everything's under revision control, so there has to be a cause and effect as a result of that. So just be aware of that one. The other one that we want you to be very careful about is that this is not a multidisciplined solution. So if you are just an organization that's doing nothing but printed circuit boards designs, or you're highly electrical with very little mechanical, this is a great solution. But if you're one of those organizations where electrical is a part of a larger picture of systems engineers and mechanical engineers and so on and so forth, you may want to look for something that can handle all of the different files in there. because ultimately what becomes the source of truth when you have multiple locations? And that's what you've got to keep in mind when you're doing that here. All right, enough of the philosophical pros and cons. Let's actually dig into the tool here a little bit. So how do we even look at this thing? Well, the visibility is done through something called the Explorer panel, and this provides your visibility into Concord Pro, very much like the projects panel. If you don't have the projects panel in Altium Designer, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot with the tool. In a similar fashion, without the Explorer panel, you're not going to be able to see much as to what's going on with the server. And if you look at it, it pretty much has the same flavor as your file explorer that you've got in your operating system. You've got your folders on the left. On the top, you have your files. And then based on the file type that you're dealing with over here, it will give you some more information at the bottom at the specific file. So in this case here, the example that we're showing, we've got the components. And of course, we clicked on a component up here, and you can see its parametric information, its footprint, and its symbol. So that's what you can expect. If I was in a completely different category like symbol, the only thing I would see here for the preview would be the symbol for it. So these are going to change depending on which folder you are in. Let me ask this question here before we go here, and I'm going to kick off our poll here. And that question is, how are you currently handling your library management in Altium Designer? I would like to just kind of get a feel for that. All right, we've got a good scattering here again amongst things. So 30% of you are using some type of centralized symbol-centric or integrated library. A good portion of you are using centralized databases as well. And then actually 1/5 of you are also using the Vault. And I'll say between 20 and 25%, either you've got each designer doing their own flavor of it, or there just really is no library management going on there. So it's actually an interesting distribution that we see there. So let's throw out there what you can do with the libraries in Concord Pro. So let's talk about that first. In Concord Pro, libraries are basically 3 core elements. You have a symbol, a footprint, and, well, pardon me, you start off with a component and you link a symbol and you link a footprint, much like a database. And as a matter of fact, this is the way we happen to set up ours, and you'll see this here in just a moment. It's not necessarily that this is the best way, it's just one of the ways we were trying to figure out how to handle naming conventions and how we were going to bring things together. So the resistor here is our actual component. This is what we would place onto the schematic, but the parts or models that get associated with it were given their own folders. And again, that was really primarily to adhere to a naming convention. So here is our the 3D. As I told you can now actually push in a model and then link it to the footprint. You have your footprint, you've got your symbol, it's the spice symbol, and of course you have your graphical symbol as well. So those are the additional elements. What I'm going to do over here is, the only other thing I'll mention here before we jump into the actual tool itself is that there are 2 editors for component management. You're going to see the individual one, and if someone asks the question, I'll bring up the batch one. But you're going to see 2 new editors. Well, one of them may be familiar to some of you. If you used to do the old Vault and you remember something called a compliv, that's really the batching editor now. But the individual one is a new one where you deal with your component up front with everything being dealt with at the same time rather than doing one editor at a time. So I'm going to escape out of here and bring you into the screen here where we've got my Explorer is set up here. And you'll notice one thing is that I am still using the Altium client, even though we are connected into Concord Pro. So just be aware that you don't have to have this depending on your licensing. Our license did come from NEXUS, so as a result, our migration to Concord Pro still requires us to use the NEXUS client. At some point, we'll get our license updated so we can just use Altium Designer. Nevertheless, what we've got here is the Explorer panel here, and we'll first talk about the library. So right now, we're doing some experiments with 2 different library types. One of them we'll call standard, and the standard means the typical library where you have all your graphics and all your parametric data brought into one location. So let's take a look at that over here. So I'll click on our resistors, and it'll retrieve these items here in just a moment. Once we've got these up here, you can see that we've got a revision ID. So this is the actual name or the key ID that you give to your components. The names themselves can be anything that you want. As a matter of fact, in one case here, we missed one when we imported it in, and then the descriptions as well. So how do we create a new component in here? So there's 2 ways. There's the library migration tool, which I won't show here today, but if anybody has questions about, I can talk about a little bit afterwards. But if I want to create a new component, I basically can just click on add new component over here, and it will bring up that particular editor. One side note I have found, either you need a really large monitor or you need 2 monitors, because a lot of times you're working between Explorer and the component editor. And that's what they did over here. They said, okay, instead of having to create that symbol separately, the footprint separately, and that component separately, let's take care of it all in one location. And there's a number of ways that you can do it, but one of the ways that you can certainly do this is that you can simply type in a name and let Octopart do a little bit of the work for you. So I'm going to throw a part in here so we can just see an example of that. So if I throw in, let's see, this RC0603, this is a Yale part, and in fact, you can see a bunch of them over here. I'm just going to grab one just so that it will fill in some of the blanks. And that's what it did. It filled in some of the blanks. Now, why did it not fill in some of these blanks? Where did these all come from? So let's talk about that for a moment. One of the important elements of creating a component is the advanced settings. And as a matter of fact, as kind of one of those rough edges, I wish Altium would actually make this always visible. Because the first thing you'd like to see is what is the ID that you're actually going to give this to make sure it matches with those IDs that you've got in that directory. So that's the first thing. The second area is where's it going to get saved to? So when I am done with this component, where are you going to save it to within Concord Pro? The template is kind of a cool feature. This is something that they introduced. And what they introduced over here is something called the component template that you can actually set up so that when you create a new component, it'll instantly fill in all of these parameters. And if you want to give them some default values, you can do that as well. And if you want to even give it a default symbol and footprint, you can also do that as well. So if you click on and say new, you could already have a symbol and a footprint already waiting for you. All your parameters are there. Notice that my template didn't have any predefined values. And yes, Octopart went in here and filled in its own. So you just have to be a little bit careful about how you set this up, because there may be things you want filled in. And yet at the same time, if you let Octopart fill things in, you may get a little bit of a mismatch over here, but that's the intent, so you could fill these in. One of the most important elements of this is this thing called the part choices. So when you create a part, you want to have a part choice, because this is what's going to be used in the BOM doc, and it could, I suppose you could also use it in a classical bill of materials. The components are generally used for the classic bill of materials, but if you're doing a BOM doc, this is the type of thing it's going to look for automatically. So if you have this set up already, then this is automatically going to find its way in there, and then you can just select it, or you can select from other options if you do have other part choices. For our symbols and our footprint, you've got 3 options. You can either use the wizard to create it, or you can create a new one. So if I create a new one, guess what it does? It just pops up your symbol editor. It looks the exact same way. The menus are pretty much the same way. The only difference is that your panel here is not going to have multiple components, because in fact it won't even have properties, because you're strictly building the graphical aspect of it. So let's go back to this. No, let's go back to here. I'm sorry. Let's go back to, I'm jumping all over the place. Let's go back to here. Thank you. All right. So you can see that it's already got the start of a particular model. If I don't like this, I can easily just remove it and start again. If I want to pick another one that already exists, I can certainly do that as well. And of course, if I want to continue editing, I can click on the little pencil and it'll jump me back into that editor. Same thing is true with the footprints. Same thing is true with the spice simulation there. Once you're done with this, then it's simply a matter of going over to your projects panel, right-clicking on it and saying, hey, let's release this to server, and now it's done. It will push all that information in there, and you'll have a new part. If you want nothing to do with it, you can say, I messed this up, I don't like it. I will hit the cancel edit here, and I'll say yes, and it just goes away. So again, I didn't have to do a file save as here, and I don't have to remove it somewhere off my hard drive. Altium is taking care of that for me. So let's go back over here. So the other thing I mentioned was that there's 2 different ways you can do this. So if you already have a database, you're saying, well, I've got this database already, and it's got all this good information in it, but I want to use Concord Pro. Can both of them play together? And the answer is yes, certainly so. And that is why we have this other set of folders over here to kind of demonstrate this. Now, we call this the TMM method here at 9.connects, and it actually means Tesla Motor Method. And the reason we do that is because we want to give them credit for the idea. This came from a forum posting where someone says, yeah, we keep our parametric data in the database and we keep our graphical information in Concord Pro. So what does that look like? Let's take a look at this resistor over here. So we'll bring this up here and we can take a look. So let me grab this here and we will right click to edit and open it. And it's going to look pretty much like you just saw with any other component. But what we do over here, so we still basically provide the name. We still provide our description. And by the way, we want our name and our description to match that looks like the stuff that would come from our database. In this case, we're using L9. So we would copy these things in. As a matter of fact, if you're going to do this, the first step you do is you declare it in your database first. Because once you've declared it in your database, the most important element of the parameters here is this thing. For us, we call it a CPN, which is a component part number. But whatever your key field is, you want to make sure that that value is in here so that when I place this on the schematic and I run the dblink file, it will go to the database, find it, and populate the rest of the parametric information in it. And that's all we do here. So we don't bother ourselves with a whole lot of parameters. We still give it a part choice. We do make sure that this information in the advanced setting is set up appropriately. And again, we have another template here. I'll show you these templates here in a moment because they are pretty cool. We already have our symbol and our footprint ready to go. So if we close this and we just demonstrate this here, I do have to make sure I have a file open, otherwise this won't work. But let's go back over to our Explorer panel and say, all right, very good. Let's go ahead and let's place this item. And by the way, you can do this in what they call now the components panel, and that'll work as well too. So you can place both in from the Explorer, and you can also place in the components panel, which used to be called the libraries panel. And by the way, I'm kind of glad they called it they changed the name of that. A lot of people used to get libraries and SCH library panels confused, so I'm glad they called it the component panel now. So I think that was a good name change. So now that I've got this over here, and as long as I have my database up and running, and as long as I have my dblink file set to go, it's really just a matter of me going into Tools, Update Parameter from Database. And by the way, we will get one failure because R4 came from the traditional library, not from the database, so it's going to complain about one part, and that's fine. But you'll see that it now found my new part over here, and I'll accept the changes and execute them. And you'll see that, yeah, okay, so my part did come from Concord Pro, but my data came from my database. So that is a very viable solution. If you have any other questions about those, feel free to write those in. What I want to do now is just talk a couple of minutes about the templates. So let's talk about our templates here for a moment. So what about the templates? Well, they provide you a whole bunch of different folders for these templates. You can see a few of them we've set down over here. I've given them these naming conventions just so that I can sort through them as to what their purposes are. A lot of them you may not need. Some of them should look very familiar to you, like the schematic overlays. Those are your SCH-DOT files. Of course, your out job templates. Those are extremely important in projects. I'll talk about that in a few moments. There's two of them that I think you'll find very useful. One of them is the one that's actually called the component template, which I've referred to already. But let's open this up to take a look at it. So I am going to edit this so you can take a look. And let's pull this down over here. So that's the whole idea of the template, is to make sure that the life cycle is predefined, that the revision scheme is predefined, that the naming convention can be predefined as well. Though your file folders can also predefine those template names if you want to do that. When it comes to the parameters, and this is the important part over here, this is where you'll list all of your parameters. You can also change your types here. So you'll notice that they even have ones for different types of values like amperage and ohms and farads and those type of things as well. If you want them to be visible upon placement, you can do that. You don't have to worry about that. Also, if they're supposed to be read-only, you can turn that on. Or if they're supposed to be required, like you cannot close and push this to the server until you've provided that information, you can. If you want to put default values, you can do that as well. The descriptions are really, really useful. I just wish that they would make these available when you're actually making the components so you can understand what those are. But you could also provide some details in the default values so that if someone's going to fill something in, then they have an idea of how that format is supposed to work. And that's what you basically do. So anytime I create a brand new component, this stuff is going to get thrown in there. And if I want to switch out the template when I'm creating that component, it's a matter of just switching out the template and working with it at that point in time. That's an example of the component template. Another template that I think you guys will like is this one that's called the project template. Now, I really wish Altium would create this PRJ PCB DOT doc, which is the equivalent of the SCH DOT doc. A lot of people have asked for a overlay for your PCB layouts, and for whatever reason they won't do it. Maybe because of the mechanical layers, but nevertheless, if you want something like that, you can now create a project template. So you go into Altium Designer, you declare a project, you add in the schematic sheet or sheets that you want to have in there. You can also add in a PCB doc and define it the way you want with the mechanical layers and your rules, maybe even the default shape of the board. If you want, you can even put out job files in here as well, and then you basically save it off. So if I go into File, New Project, this project template is available for me, and I just simply work off of that. So a really nice feature that they've added in there as well. Of course, there's out job templates as well. The only reason I bring these up is that these are really important for project release. You cannot release a project to Concord Pro unless you have out jobs set up for it. The one thing I really like about this, and I just wanted to bring this to your attention, is that depending on how you set up your out jobs, you get a preview of what specifically is going to be created from that out job file. So that's a nice feature. And of course, there's these other ones here as well. If time was permitting, I'd probably dig into a few more, but I want to keep this moving in a timely fashion. So that's it with the templates. Let's talk about the projects. Projects are actually a pretty simple thing. You can see that I've got a managed project here. Here are your little check marks. So again, it's using Git, but for your purposes or anybody's purposes, unless you've got an SVN repository, the Git repository looks and acts the exact same way. If I make a change later on, I can right click, do a version control, and I can commit the project or the file to it. If I have a project like this one over here and I want to manage it because it's not been put into Git, it's really simply a matter of right clicking and say convert to manage project. And at that point, so the project be saved, it'll say yes and continue. It's going to ask me for a name here. It's going to ask me where I want to store it, where I'm going to put it in the revision path here. So this is the name. I'm just going to press OK. I figured I'd do this on the fly here so you could see this. And boom, once this is done here, you'll see the check marks to indicate this is now in Git, this is now a managed project. And if I'm ready to do actually a release of this project, I can do so. So that's what's going on over there. So while that is doing it, hopefully I didn't lock myself out a little bit, but I was going to show you guys the Explorer panel here, but it's not going to let me do it until the loop is done. But that's kind of what you do with the project. I'll talk about the project here for a moment. So again, we've mentioned before, it's it's a Git version control. You declare the project to be managed. You saw how easy it was, just to right click, you check a few things and you're done. And then all those external projects can be brought in. So it's not a huge effort to do that. The functionality is going to be the exact same thing. So you're going to use the schematic editor the same way you've done it before. The PCB editor is going to be done the same way. Out jobs are really important here. So out jobs you've got to have set up. Either they are part of the project or you have them as templates ready to go. And then if you've released something, once you've released it, then the user must declare a new revision if the changes are necessary there. So before we jump into that polling question, we'll see if we've finished up over here. And I believe we have, so I'll pull this one up. And just to show you a finished example, I'm going to go to my projects. So you can see that right now, as a matter of fact, you don't even see the Neo 9 being here because it's in Git, but we have not formally released it yet. So I'm going to go to the mixer, which we have formally released, and we can see what it looks like. All right, so you can see that you've got our source, our fabrication, our assembly. I'll pull this out so you can see all those. We saw this picture earlier, but that's exactly what it is. So if I want any of these things to look at or to provide to someone else like the fabricator or the assembler, I really just click on those to download them and away I go. So that's how we release those. If we don't like what we've got here, we need to make a change, I'll make those changes here in my, basically I'll open it up. I can do file open, it will bring those up. I'll make those changes, I'll push those into Git, and then when it's ready to go, I will simply go and do project. And pardon me, let me make sure I'm in the right location for this. You got to be in the project to do that. So let's click on the project. So I have to be in project and then project releaser. And by the way, one thing I got to give Altium kudos for is that in the past, in order to do a project release, it used to require actually 3 different windows that you had to open in order to do this. Now with this, it's just one window, and you make sure you set up your out job files accordingly, and then it will go through the process of creating both your assembly and your fabrication folders. I'd click on this prepare button, but it will actually take it about 5 minutes to do so, so I will spare you that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what you're supposed to do with the projects. Now, with that being said, I am going to jump back to my PowerPoint slide here. So let's continue from current slide here. Basically, I've shown you what I can in the time that we've got, and I would just like to know, after what you've seen, we'll give you a poll here. Let me know if it's still confusing. It's okay if you really like it. If it isn't for you, not touching it. Be kind of curious to see what your opinions are of it. Okay, we will we'll close the poll over here, and hopefully you can see the results. So almost about 60 of you said it was okay. I have to define what okay means. For the 22% of you who are still confused, I would definitely ask you, please write in a question in the questions panel so I can see if I can try to untangle anything that I may have overlooked, and trying to get all of this done in the time that I'm trying to do it if there is something that was maybe fundamental that I missed. Glad to see none of you hated it. That's a really good thing for it. Some of you may just say this simply is not for you, and others said, hey, this is really cool, I love it. So again, if you love it and you don't own it, then definitely contact Altium. They'll be more than happy to take it further with you on that. And then just one other question before we jump into our Q&A. How would you rate the presentation material? I definitely would like to know your feedback on this. Okay, so for a good portion of you, it was relevant for what you needed. For those who was either over your head or didn't meet your expectations, again, ask me some questions. I'd like to know what we've missed so that we can clarify those things for you. All right, with that, please do write some questions in the questions panel. I'll take a look at those in just a moment. But of course, just want to talk to you a moment about 9.connects. You're here for a reason. You, want to understand better understanding of Concord Pro and what it's able to do. Possibly you wanted to know what we knew about Concord Pro, and of course, formerly known as NEXUS. So hopefully I was able to show you that we have been around in terms of looking at Concord Pro and NEXUS for quite a bit of time now, and we have a pretty good feel for its capabilities. What do we provide here at 9.connect? So obviously we don't sell it, but people have been coming to us for a number of things. And what have they been asking us to do? Library cleanup, demolition and rebuild. That's unfortunately one of the big things we find with libraries, is that a lot of times they really do need a good rebuild. We've got to kind of start them from the beginning, take what we can salvage and rebuild them up again. Library migration, as I mentioned before, it does a great job of migrating, but you've got to know how to migrate it properly or you're going to have a lot of duplication in it. Directory naming conventions, something that you really want to think about, because once you've created those naming conventions, it's really tough to delete things and start again. Directory configurations, for the needs of your company, you want to think long-term and you want to think outside of your possibly your group. How do you help other groups that may benefit from it as well? And of course, admin and user training are the things we do. In particular, one of the things we offer is we do basically, I'll call a 4-day. 2 of those days, we will actually work with you online. What we have found is that the prep time it takes to get things going, to get buy-in from your colleagues and to get things set up, if you do have it, does just take a bit of time. If we got to clean up libraries, you got to meet with your colleagues for their buy-in, the component preparation, all that type of stuff, and just basically the grunt work of getting this done as well. It's a lot easier for us to meet in small increments online to get you moving forward, and then you go offline to do what you need to do, and then we meet again to continue this forward, rather than try to do everything like drinking from a fire hose within 2 days. After that's been set up and you feel comfortable with it, then we do a 2-day on-site. We work 1 day with the administrator, making sure everything is set to go and answering their questions, and we spend the next day working with the team to explain to them what they need to do within Concord Pro. So if that's of interest to you, that's something that we do offer to our customers. So